Okay, well, we're going to jump right back into this cardiovascular section. If you have not done so, make sure you watch the short lecture I put out on the evolution of the heart and the cardiovascular system, and then come back and watch this. So we're going to go into the cardiovascular system, and we're not going to get into the names of all the blood vessels traveling throughout the body. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to focus on the heart, the function of the heart, and then the function of the blood vessels and the differences between them. So let's get started. So the cardiovascular system, cardio refers to heart, vascular refers to vascularity or the blood vessels. Really important, obviously. It's a really important part of the human body. If someone has a heart attack, it's one of the most common ways that a person's going to die. And the reason why a person dies is because the heart is essentially an engine, it's a pump. And its job is to move blood through the blood vessels because, as we've mentioned in our class countless times, you're probably sick of hearing me say it, but we are a community of cells, right? So we're made up of trillions of cells, and each one of those cells has a lot of demands. First of all, there's a lot of demands for resources from the cells. For example, oxygen, glucose in order to make energy. Those little mitochondria, they need their raw materials to churn out ATP. Different parts of the body have higher demands. Your brain has a lot more blood vessels in it. Your digestive tract and the entire digestive system have a lot of blood vessels. So certain areas have a higher demand and they have more blood going to them. Also nutrients, right? So things like proteins and fats, those things all need to get to the cells. Also, these cells produce waste, and that waste has to get removed from the cell and gotten rid of. So if you have a cell that's pretty far from your heart, you know that blood needs to get to and from the heart in order to get rid of those wastes and in order to get all the resources that they need. What is the cardiovascular system? Well, as I said, it's made up of the heart and all the blood vessels. What is the heart? The heart is a four-chambered muscle. Now, this is the thing that makes the heart so cool to me, is that it's a muscle. That's what it is. So think about our muscle unit. A muscle is a very simple machine. It's made up of protein fibers that all run in one direction, and they're going to contract and they're going to make that muscle get smaller, and the muscle is going to make your body move. Where the heart is a little bit different. The heart is a muscle, just like your skeletal muscles are, in the sense of how they work. There's actin and there's myosin, and when the actin head, when the myosin head attaches to the actin, the muscle contracts. The difference is this muscle has a very different job. It's not for movement; it's for pushing blood out into the body. So its muscles are going to be a little bit different, structurally. There's going to be those intercalated discs, which we talked about. These muscles actually branch as opposed to just go in a straight line, and that allows for the complex structure of the heart. But really, what the heart is it's a muscle, and it's a very well designed muscular organ that is hollow. It's got open spaces in there in order to push blood out. It's not that big. They say if you take your two fists and put them together, so ball up your fists real quick and then put them together so that your knuckles from each hand are touching each other. That's about the size of your heart. And the heart is, they say, about 9 centimeters wide and about 14 centimeters long from top to bottom. Where is the heart found? Well, if you say the Pledge of Allegiance, if you ask any kid, little kid, put your hand on your heart, they're going to blow it. They're going to do it all wrong. They're going to put their hand way over to the left side of their chest. They're going to put it almost up by their shoulder. And, little kids not that smart, right? So, where is your heart actually located? Well, if you were to put your hand on your heart, it would actually be right in the middle of your chest. So it's in what we call that little cavity called the mediastinum, which is that space in between your lungs. So if you remember back to first unit of the year, we talked about the cavities of the body, and the thorax, the thoracic cavity, which is your chest cavity, has a couple different areas. There's a pleural cavity where your lungs are, and then in the middle of those lungs is your mediastinum. And in that mediastinum is the pericardial cavity, which is where your heart lives. It sits on top of the diaphragm. So your diaphragm is that flat sheet muscle that lies underneath your lungs. It has a couple very important jobs, one being breathing, right? When it contracts, it pulls oxygen into your lungs. And also, it's basically a platform for your lungs and heart to sit on. If they were to pull the diaphragm out of your body, your heart and your lungs would just fall directly into your digestive area. So that would be bad, right? Gravity's pulling down. So basically, that diaphragm there acts as a shelf for your heart. Now, this is where things get a little weird in terms of terminology. If I say the base of something, my initial thought would be it's the bottom. But in the case of the heart, the base actually refers to the top of the heart. And it's found just beneath the second rib. So, I'm not in front of you guys right now, so you're going to have to kind of do this on your own. But if you go to your chest right now and you go to that notch, that sternal notch right at the top of your sternum there where the bone kind of dips down, that's going to be where your number one rib is. And then if you count down one rib, that's where your heart starts, is the top of your heart. So it's really pretty high up in your chest. It's a lot higher up probably than you think. And then the apex, which again, kind of a strange terminology, because when I think of apex, I think of a point. You think of the apex of a tent or the apex of any kind of structure that has a shape to it where it points upwards. The apex would be the top, but in this case the apex is the bottom. So if you look at this diagram here, the base of the heart would be up here right around the second rib, and then the apex is this bottom portion right down here where it comes to a point, and that's at about the fifth rib. So if you take a look here at this diagram, the top of the heart is going to be at the second rib. So rib 1, rib 2, that's the top of the heart. And if you count down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that is going to be the bottom of the heart right there. And it actually points a little bit towards the left. So those little kids that are, putting their hand on their heart and they're going to the left side of their chest there, they're not entirely wrong. Your heart does kind of point off to the left. So if you look at this diagram here, if this is the midline of the body, that's that middle line there. The heart has actually a little lateral here to the left. So it is a little bit to the left of your chest. They're not completely wrong. And then you have your lungs on the lateral side. Your sternum is going to be anterior to the front. And then obviously your vertebrae is on the back. Now your heart is an important organ, just like most of your organs are. And it also has covering. So if you think back to the brain unit, the brain is surrounded in these protective layers called meninges. Well, the heart is also protected by some layers of membrane. So let's go through those. The first layer and the outermost layer, the most superficial layer, is going to be called the fibrous pericardium. Peri, means outer, cardio means heart, and fibrous means tough, right? So fiber, think strong. So this is a tough outer layer around the heart. It actually looks like a bag, and it's very similar to the outer layer of the brain, the dura mater, in the sense that it's tough and it's strong, and it's the outer layer. So that's that bag essentially surrounding the heart. The second layer below that is on the inside of that fibrous pericardium. You're going to have the parietal pericardium, and that's the inner lining of that pericardial cavity. That pericardial cavity is going to be a space there between the layers. If you think back to the brain, I'm comparing this to the brain, between the layers, you have your dura mater, you have your arachnoid mater, and then there's that space, the subarachnoid space. The pericardial cavity is kind of like that. And it also has a fluid in there. It has a fluid called serous fluid. And serous fluid is mostly water, but it is a little bit slick. And what that does is it provides a little bit of a friction reduction. Think about your heart. Your heart is beating up to 100 times a minute or more every minute of your life for hopefully a very long life. That is a lot of wear and tear. Think about a car engine. Those cars, you have to put oil in your car. I made the mistake when I got my first car. I did not put oil in it. I thought I was saving money, and I was stupid, and my engine seized up on me because I didn't change the oil, and the car broke down. Because what oil does, all these mechanical parts are rubbing up against each other, and that oil is the lubricant that lets your engine work. Any intelligent person would recognize that, but I decided I didn't want to. I was broke and I didn't want to spend the money on an oil change, and I paid the price. So this is kind of like the oil of the heart in the sense that it prevents a little bit of friction, not a little bit of friction, a lot of friction. As your heart beats, it's rubbing up. The heart actually is a very violent organ in terms of how it functions. It beats in a very, think of how the fact that you can put your hand on your chest and you can feel your heart beating. That is how violent that muscle contraction is. It's bouncing around in there. And when it rubs up against the cavity and it rubs up against these membranes, that's going to cause friction. And over time, it's going to be a little bit of wear and tear. So the pericardial cavity has that serous fluid in there, and that allows the heart to beat over and over and over again. And then finally, we have the visceral pericardium, and the visceral pericardium is the membrane that is on the heart itself. It has a second name. It's also called the epicardium. So this is just a couple diagrams that show these different membranes. So this would be the fibrous pericardium on the outside of the heart, and then we have the parietal pericardium on the inside of the membrane. This is the pericardial space right here. That's that space in the middle there, the cavity, where you're going to have your serous fluid. So that would be the fibrous pericardium there. And then on the heart itself is the visceral pericardium, or the epicardium. I'm going to finish up on this little short lecture with this last slide here, which is the layers of the heart again. I just like this diagram because you can see it, kind of what's going on here. So let me run through it. So first of all, we have the epicardium, which is the same as the visceral pericardium. So these are the layers of the heart wall. So we talked about the membranes of the heart on the outside. The first one is going to be the epicardium. And the epicardium is the same as the visceral pericardium. So this is technically one of the layers of the heart. It's that epicardium there, and that's that outer membrane of the heart. It's made up of a thin connective tissue, and its job, as I said before, is to secrete this fluid, right? That is going to protect and give a little bit of friction reduction. And the next layer, if we're talking about the heart itself, is going to be this thick middle layer. And this is the thick part of the heart, and that is the myocardium. Myo means muscle. So the heart wall is going to be made up of this muscular layer. And you can see those muscle cells there. If you think back to the muscle unit, you can see those intercalated discs here. You can see the nuclei. And you can see how those cells are going to branch. Instead of just going in straight lines, they're going to branch slightly. And when those muscles contract, they pump the blood out to the body. And then finally, we have our endocardium. And the endocardium is this thin inner layer, which is made up of epithelial and connective tissue. So these are epithelial cells. And those cells are going to have a very smooth surface because blood has to travel through the heart. And again, when think about what rain does to a statue over time. It weathers it, right? It wears it down. Well, the same thing would happen with your heart wall. So by having this inside of the heart very slick, it's very, very slick. And unfortunately, I'm hoping we get back to school. And if we do get back to school, we're just going to do a couple dissections right in a row because we missed the brain dissection and we're going to miss the heart dissection here. But if you were able to open up the heart, usually students are very surprised by how slick that inner wall is here, that endocardium. It almost feels like rubber, and that's to help prevent the friction. So, quick review of what I just said here. There's 3 layers of the heart wall. The outermost layer is the epicardium. It's the same as the visceral pericardium, so the inner membrane is the same as the outer layer of the heart wall. They're the same exact thing, the epicardium here. And then we have our myocardium, which is the thick inner membrane, that middle layer, which is what makes up most of the wall. And then finally, we have our endocardium, which is this very slick inner layer. Thank you very much.